Hello and welcome to my second watercolor illustration process video. I didn't really have a plan for this piece when I started, so it's going to be a bit of an improvised painting process. I have laid out this sketch in blue and red Prismacolor Verithin pencil, which is a great tool to have, and I have taped the edges with blue masking tape, which is an optional step. Often I just let my watercolor bleed into the surrounding white paper, but I decided I would do a colored background this time. I've also wrapped around to the back of the sketchbook, keep the paper a little bit tight and prevent buckling. It's not as good as taping your paper down to a flat surface, but acceptable if you want to keep the page in your sketchbook. Most of my watercolors start with wet on wet painting, which just means get your whole paper wet and then drop in bits of color and let them bloom into each other. Letting your color bleed like this is visually interesting, but more importantly, it emulates the way that color light might bounce around your subject and the scenery. So once your wet on wet layer has dried, you can start to lay in some flat washes. Err on the side of making these washes too light, because it's much easier to darken them later than to bring highlights back in, especially early on when you haven't established your value scale. Once I put this background wash in, I start to feel a little aimless, so I decided to remove my tape and lay in some lines. I'm using a mix of gray and brown gouache for this step, but watercolor works just as well. I use a fine brush or a dip pen for this step. So now that I've got my darks and lights back, I start to feel a little more grounded, and I add some more red shadows on the skin. I was originally going to use yellow highlights like firelight, but when I put the first bit of yellow down, it didn't feel right, and I decided since there's a lot of reflected red light from the costume dominating the shadows, I would use a cool color for the highlight. Normally watercolor is an additive medium, meaning you don't really go lighter. Having some white gouache in your kit gives you a little more freedom if you decide you want to work in some lighter tone. You'll notice though that the light blue I'm laying in dulls rapidly as it dries, so it takes a few passes to build it up to the value I want. When it's time to pick out the sharp white highlights in her costume, I decide I don't want to deal with that, and I just use some white acrylic ink in a dip pen. You can use a brush for this, just make sure you rinse it frequently so that no ink dries in your brush. After that, I just clean up the areas of her shawl where the itch got a little messy, and the areas where my background layer bled under my masking tape, and I'm done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and follow me on Tumblr, and there'll be a lot more soon. Thank you.